Okay, so you're putting in the work, right? You've got this podcast, amazing content, but how do you actually get it heard? Like really break through and build that audience that's actually loyal, you know? That's what we're diving into today, this whole psychology of podcast PR and how to make it work even if you don't have a massive budget.
And it's so interesting how much psychology actually comes into this.
Oh, totally.
We're talking about trust, connection. It's about making people feel like they're part of something.
It's like you're building a community, right?
Yes, exactly.
Ugh.
But it's like, where do you even start?
Yeah.
And, forget the logos, the fancy websites, all of that for a sec. Our expert really emphasized this. Step one, it's about your podcast's positioning.
Positioning, that's
Yeah. Like, how are you different? How do you stand out?
in the sea of a million podcasts.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
They actually had this great analogy. Imagine your podcast. It's at a party, right?
Okay, I like this.
How would you introduce it?
Yeah.
And not just like, hi, this is my podcast.
Please listen.
Yeah. How do you make it memorable? How do you make someone actually want to listen?
That's so true.
And they gave this example. There's this health podcast, right?
Mm.
And they were struggling. Let's be honest.
Well, I mean, how many health podcasts are there? It's a lot.
It's a lot. So they're lost in the crowd. But then, this is interesting. They realized they had this story. The host, they had this whole journey with an autoimmune disease.
Okay.
And they started weaving that into the podcast.
Interesting. So they found their angle.
Yeah, exactly. They became the voice for people who felt lost and confused in all the wellness noise.
Instead of just another expert.
Yes. It was like they understood the struggle personally.
Right, because anyone can give generic advice, but it's like when you've been there,
It's different.
it's different.
And the research shows, there's actually studies on this, when we share personal stories, it releases oxytocin in the brain, the connection hormone.
Wait, seriously. So by being vulnerable, sharing our stories, we're like chemically bonding with our listeners.
Exactly. It's about tapping into those very human needs, that need for connection, for belonging.
Okay, that's super interesting, but let's get tactical for a sec. What can people actually do besides, hiring a PR firm? Most of us, that's not happening.
Right, right, exactly. Well, there are some things in here, some really smart strategies that don't have to cost a ton. One that really jumped out, it's guesting on other podcasts.
Okay, yeah.
But there's a smart way to do it. You can't just be like, hey, I have a podcast too.
Right, because nobody cares.
Exactly. You've got to offer something to their audience, not just yours.
So how do you find that balance? Like, how do you pitch yourself in a way that's, actually interesting?
It's about being strategic.
Mm-hmm.
They gave a good example, a fitness coach, right? They wanted to get on more wellness podcasts,
Yeah.
which totally makes sense.
Valid audience.
Exactly. But here's the thing. They didn't just pitch themselves as another fitness expert.
Okay.
They talked about their own struggles with body image and how they'd actually built this really supportive community around that.
Interesting. So it wasn't just like, listen to me, I know about fitness. It was more like, hey, I've been through this, I get it, and here's how we can all support each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was authentic, it was relatable, and you know what? They were flooded with invitations.
Wow, that's amazing. It's like proof that a good story, a real story, it really does make all the difference.
It really does. And it actually ties back to what we were talking about before, the psychology of trust.
Right, that whole oxytocin thing.
Yeah. Well, there's another principle here, too. It's called social proof.
Social proof. Okay.
Think about it. You're looking for a restaurant online. If you see a place with, like, hundreds of 5-star reviews.
Oh, I'm there. I'm sold.
Right. It's like, okay, well, if all those people loved it, it must be good.
It's true.
We're wired for that kind of validation. And there's research on this. Like studies actually show that online reviews, they're more persuasive than any other kind of advertising.
Wow. That's kind of crazy when you think about it. So how do we do that with a podcast? How do we get those reviews?
You've got to ask. Encourage your listeners to leave reviews, testimonials, all of that. And just as important, share them.
So don't be shy about asking for those 5-star ratings.
Not at all. Actually, they recommend putting it right in your call to action at the end of each episode. Remind people, tell them, hey, leaving a review really helps other people find the show.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's not just about vanity, right? It's actually about helping more people find the show, maybe even connect with content that could really help them.
Exactly. And
What?
think about it. Every positive review is like a little endorsement. It's word of mouth, but in a way that can reach so many more people. And that can make a huge difference in how people see your podcast. It's like this instant credibility boost.
Yeah, it's true. We do kind of follow the crowd, If everybody else says it's great, it must be great.
Right. And that's why testimonials are so powerful, especially when you're just starting out. But you know what? There's actually something even more important than social proof.
Okay, now I gotta know. More important than 100 five-star reviews. What is it?
Authenticity.
Authenticity. Okay.
Because listeners can spot a fake a mile away.
Oh, for sure.
So like they have this sixth sense, right?
Totally. So how do you make sure, like, how do you know if your podcast feels real, not just like, some persona you've created?
Well, it goes back to what we were talking about before, being willing to share your story, even the messy parts.
Okay.
Think about the podcasts that you really like listening to.
Yeah.
They feel real,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. It's like you're just sitting down, having a conversation with a friend.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what you want. Don't be afraid to let your guard down a little bit, share those behind the mic moments.
Oh, interesting.
Even the ones where you maybe messed up a little bit.
Wait, really? Like, admit to making mistakes?
Yes. They told this story. I thought it was so funny. This podcaster, right?
Mm.
They forgot to hit record during an interview
Oh, no.
with this big-time guest.
Oh, that's the worst.
I know. But instead of, freaking out, trying to hide it,
Right.
they talked about it on their next episode.
Oh, really?
They made it into this funny thing about why you always got to double-check your equipment.
I love that.
Yeah.
And how did people react?
They loved it.
Yeah.
Because it made the podcaster seem real,
Yeah.
human. Like they weren't afraid to be imperfect.
So it's like embracing those imperfections can actually make you more relatable.
Exactly. It takes the pressure off, right? You don't have to be perfect all the time.
That's a good reminder. So, okay, someone's listening to this right now. They're feeling fired up. They're ready to get their podcast out there. What's the one thing you would tell them?
Start with your story.
Yeah.
What makes your podcast unique? What can you share that nobody else can? And I think once you figure that out, the rest will start to fall into place.
So find your niche, own your story, and don't be afraid to be yourself.
There you go. It's so true.
It's like that old saying, right? Be yourself. Everybody else is already taken.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, it takes time. Building an audience, it takes effort. There's going to be bumps in the road.
It's a journey.
But don't give up. The world needs to hear your voice.
Love that. And that's a wrap on another deep dive. We hope you learned something new today and that you're feeling inspired to share your voice with the world.
Yes.
We'll see you next time.